Hello and welcome to the Public Square, a show that explores public affairs and religious liberty issues that affect our nation and beyond. I'm your host, Paul Goodridge, and I serve as the Public Affairs and Religious Liberty Director for the South Central Conference. In each episode, we'll talk to people who are on the front lines of the fight for civil and religious liberty. In every show, we look to inspire individuals, inform them about issues, ignite a passion, and inspire them to serve. We also integrate faith principles in terms of what we do and how we move forward. Well, today is Juneteenth. It is the national holiday here in the United States. And it's fitting that it's an opportunity for us to look at life in the United States, living in America. We're going to be joined by a number of experts in a number of different fields that look at what it means to live in the realities of living in America in this current time period. So be sure to subscribe to let others know that we are on and to join in the conversation. And so at this time, let's meet in the public square. We have a number of individuals who will be joining us this evening, and I want to begin with either we can put them all on the screen at the same time, or we can, there you go. We begin with Dr. Zakiba Henderson, who's the founder and principal consultant of Equity, Safety, and Wellbeing Consultants. We also are joined by Dr. Dedrick Blue, who's the ministerial secretary for the Northeastern Conference of Seventh-day Adventists. We also have Melissa Reed, who is the Associate Public Affairs and Religious Liberty Director for the North American Division of Seventh-day Adventists. And finally, we have Dr. Everett Roper, who is a project manager for the Missile Defense Agency. Welcome, everybody, to the Public Square.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
All right. So today we're going to talk about living in America. And I think I want to begin by giving each of you an opportunity to kind of just give an opening statement as to how you would sum up what it means to be living in America at this time, from whatever perspective you choose to come from. And just based on my screen, I'm just going to ask Dr. Zakiba Henderson, and if you don't mind, I'll from now on just refer to you as Zakiba. So in your estimation, how would you sum up life in America, or what it means to be living in America in 2025?
Well, from my perspective, it is very frustrating, and actually, frankly, it's scary to live in America in 2025. Coming from my perspective as a healthcare provider and as a public health professional, I'm very concerned about the erosion of trust in institutions, particularly in public health. I'm very concerned about skepticism and the lack of belief in data and evidence. And I'm very concerned about the disinvestment in improving, the life and situations for those who are more vulnerable in this country and have been disenfranchised, and that there are widening disparities and inequities that are no longer a priority to eliminate.
Okay, and we'll dive into that a little bit more. Dr. Blue, Dedrick, please share with us from your perspective. What are some of the issues that you see as alarming, or some things that you find positive when it comes to the realities of living in America today?
Well, let's start with the alarming. Today happens to be Juneteenth, and I was in my yard with my wife enjoying myself, and I was thinking to myself, what would my great-grandfather think of the life that I live now in this country? You see, I had a great-grandfather who was born a slave in Virginia. And after the emancipation, he was a circuit rider preacher. And he was going around from church to church in his little district there, teaching his people how to read. Well, he was discovered that he was teaching his people how to read. He was caught and killed. His body was thrown into the James River. He was never heard of again. That was the attempt back then to sort of marginalize a people, to erase their history and to tell them that they don't count. Here we are 160 years after that time, and we are right back where we started from. This attempt to erase our history, to marginalize us, and to tell us that if we to speak, then there are consequences to us exercising our liberties. So on this Juneteenth day, I'm greatly moved by this discussion at this time. And living in America for me feels like deja vu.
Wow. Wow. Okay. Okay. Melissa, same question to you in terms of how do you see living in America in the United at this time today?
Right. Well, my fellow panelists, what they shared resonated with me. Both, the sort of rejection of subject matter expertise that we now see with this rise of populism here in the United States is something I've never seen before, and certainly am concerned by. I'm puzzled by it also. I'm not able to sort of understand that. And then what Dr. Blue was saying, as far as we really have come back to a place of no longer regarding each other as fellow human beings. If you have a different perspective than me, I don't respect that perspective. And in fact, I no longer consider you an individual worthy of sort of dignity, or and that to me, I mean, it goes concerning is a insufficient term, that we are now in that space. I think also, just to add an additional thing, I'm very concerned in the public policy area of seeing bypassing of traditional government structures and processes to achieve not only political goals, but social and spiritual goals of individuals. And that to me, as an American, we're talking about what it's like to live in America. As an American, that's something that I've always been very proud of and appreciative of, is our, three branches of government and how they are able to sort of balance each other, and the powers that are achieved by each branch. And what we're seeing now is an executive branch that's just completely, overreaching its level of power, and we're seeing a court system and a Congress that's allowing that, maybe even enabling that.
Okay. Okay. And yeah, we definitely will kind of see how that touches a number of areas within life in the United States. This idea of the eroding of policies and structures that typically serve as guardrails to a number of things. Everett, I wanted to get your perspective in terms of living in America today.
Well, this is an easy question for me to answer because I'm using a blueprint. Just this week, I had the unfortunate experience of having one of the appliances in our house go out. It's fairly new, so it was puzzling to me. So what I did was I actually pulled out the manual to make sure I was using it correctly. As I looked through the manual and I went through page by page, I started to say, well, maybe I'm doing something wrong. And I did find out where I was doing something wrong. So with this question, I have to do the exact same thing. And one of the first things that come to my mind is the preamble of the United States. When I look at the preamble of the United States, we don't repeat it very often. I'm sure you don't. I know I don't. But if you remember, it's we the people of the United States in order to form a more perfect union. Let's pick out some of these keywords as I'm talking. Establishing a more perfect union. Are we unionized today? Or we are united, I guess I should say, today? Establish justice. Can we talk about justice for a moment? Do we want to go down that road? That's a conversation that we could really dig deep into. Ensuring domestic tranquility. There's a whole lot of the National Guard's on the scene in Los Angeles right now. We know about there's no peace and tranquility across the United States when you think about it. provide for the common defense, and actually promoting the general welfare. When you talk about Doge and the big beautiful bill and some of the things that are being stripped from us that some of my panelists have talked about just a few moments ago, is there general welfare for all? Are we united? Is there tranquility? So when I look at the preamble, I don't have to go very far. That's the blueprint, that's the manual. And as I go line by line, I shake my head with each one of these. So there are key words in that preamble that don't align with what I think America was intended to be and where we are today in 2025.
Okay. Okay. Well, thank you for that. So let's kind of dive in a little bit. So we talk about the intent of the framers of the Constitution and the idea, especially now in terms of Juneteenth and the emancipation of Black people and allowing everybody to have to live free, to be able to do what they need to do to take care of themselves, etc. And the idea that this Emancipation Proclamation coming from Abraham Lincoln was to supersede all states that may have their own interpretation or things that they would look to do differently. But there seems to be a reversal of that now in terms of instead of the government applying something or stating things that would apply to everybody regardless of states in terms of preferences, there seems to be a dismantling of that and a going back to states' rights, which just gets very, very complicated. So, Melissa, I guess I'll kind of start with you. What is happening here, and what do you see are the potential dangers if we continue down this road?
Yeah, good question. And unfortunately, yeah, that observation is absolutely correct. Your freedoms depend on on which state you live in and which jurisdiction you live in, whether you're protected in various components, whether or not your reproductive rights, your sexual orientation, gender identity rights, your religious freedom rights, all of these protected classes, right? Your gender rights, all of these things are very vastly your due process, depending on where you live here in the, as Dr. Roper pointed out, United States. And so that to me is very puzzling. And it certainly contributes to the sort of instability, chaotic sort of nature of the world that we live in right now. And it's tough to navigate as an individual because things are changing so quickly. The freedoms that we have experienced, at least within our lifetime, or at least within my lifetime, that have I've never even considered that it's something that could potentially be taken away from me, are now under a very real threat in various ways, and so yeah, I don't understand I guess the end goal there, but I know that in working in public policy and particularly in government affairs work and legislative, I've worked both on the federal level and state legislation. And it's really easy to pass legislation in the state because most states have supermajorities as far as their political right. And so it's really easy here. I live in Maryland, a very dark blue state. It's really easy for the Democratic Party to pass legislation. It's really easy in Iowa or Oklahoma to pass legislation that is, sponsored by the Republican Party. And so, and then once that legislation is passed, it becomes something that can then be used in other jurisdiction and is very often used. Lawmakers are lazy, right? And they'll use what exists already if it achieves their goals. That's what they want to do. And so that once it happens in one state, and of course there's coordinated national efforts that are taking place. So it's not just being introduced in one jurisdiction, it's being introduced in all the friendly jurisdictions. And then once it becomes law in the states, then they're that much closer to it than becoming federal legislation.
So, Zakiba, how are you seeing this being played out when it comes to healthcare and reproductive rights, and not just that, but also in terms of just health and health disparities?
Well, we have a situation right now. When you talk about reproductive health, reproductive rights, there is a crisis in our country. We have a crisis of poor maternal health. We have a crisis of poor infant health. We have a crisis of our country being at the bottom of all industrialized and wealthy nations when it comes to outcomes for moms and babies. And when you think about moms and babies, they're most vulnerable, and it's often the canary in the mine of what's happening in terms of health for the rest of the country. And if we can't care for our most vulnerable, if we have the worst outcomes among nations that have similar GDP, then we have a problem. And it starts with policy. It starts with prioritizing health. And the thing that scares me the most is that health and healthcare has been commodified, where there is more of a priority in profit than an individual's health. And then when we go and think about population health, there's even less priority when you look at population level health outcomes. And the policies that we put in place, both at the state and federal level, have a huge impact on health outcomes. When we think about this big, beautiful bill, I don't know if we want to talk about that yet, but thinking about some of the proposed cuts and cuts that have already been made, the impact that it will have down the line on outcomes are significant. And when we think about the erosion of rights, just in Georgia, we had a woman who was brain dead, who was forced to carry a pregnancy when she died months ago in terms of her brain death. And it's likely that this infant that was born will have major problems and issues. This infant was only 1 pound at the gestational age when this infant would have been at least 3 or 4 pounds weight, just to give you an idea of how bad it was for that pregnancy to be carried on without the choice of the patient who had advanced directive, and without the choice of her family to make for her bodies, and without having bodily autonomy. I understand that we all have different beliefs when it comes to reproductive freedoms, but I also know, as a provider of reproductive health, that most people don't understand the importance of having access to the full spectrum of reproductive health care. For example, in states that have huge restrictions on abortion, we also have problems and increased poor outcomes for desired pregnancies. So people who may have miscarriages or people who may have complications, these complications can't be managed according to clinical and scientific evidence to have the best outcomes because of these restrictive laws. And it makes me very afraid for my children. I have 3 daughters. I'm very afraid for them to get pregnant in the state of Georgia, knowing that they will not have control of their bodies. So we're at a very critical time in our country where all of those freedoms that we've taken for granted for so long are being taken away.
And it makes it challenging when you're dealing with going from state to state to state, because I think it's almost like the lottery system, so to speak. It's just the luck of the draw, where you're born, where you live, having to cross state lines in order to get certain type of health. It's challenging. It's challenging. Zakiba, you kind of mentioned DOGE, or you touched on DOGE, and I kind of want to get your Everett. I want to get your take on this. We talk about this idea of waste, fraud, and abuse, and all these cuts that are designed to root out these things, to be able to balance the budget, etc. As a financial analyst, somebody who is in very averse in that world, what's happening? Are we reaching our goals? What is going on?
Well, I'm glad you went there with Doge. Working for the government, I see this firsthand. I've seen this firsthand. I've had people that have been escorted out of the building where I work, just for no reason than just the government has decided that your job is going away. It's very, very damaging here in Alabama, but I'm sure it is happening across the country. I want to go back to answer your question. I want to go back to what we talked about when I talked about the preamble, and I don't want to stay there, but I can't. My mind just continues to go there. Just the section that says promote the general welfare. I want us all to understand. I know we know it here on this panel, but it's the government's responsibility to work for the well-being of all citizens. I think the problem with the government right now is we're defining what well-being is. And so when you have a government that's saying, I know what's best for you, you just listen to me, I think that's what's happening. And that's what Sakiba was just talking about. The government is choosing to determine what is best for us, when you can have certain rights taken from you, and it's for your good. Just trust us on this. So they're creating policies. The government is supposed to create policies that are supposed to protect our public health, our safety, our economic stability, our social well-being. I mean, this is the foundational principle of what the U.S. government was established for. But when you talk about Doge coming in and saying, we know what's best for you, and we're going to reduce the waste and the fraud, the problem with the government is they tend to look down when they're trying to reduce waste and fraud instead of looking parallel or looking up. Okay? So I know what's best for you, so I'm going to take away some of the social programs that exist for everyone. Now remember, they exist to promote the well-being of everyone, but they're not protecting the well-being of everyone. They're protecting the well-being of those that are above them typically. If they were to look up, you could see that there's a lot of waste and fraud and abuse right above them, right in our government, right in our corporate entities. There's so many things that we could talk about, and I'll go into them. Anti-labor laws, trust laws, labor laws, environmental laws, Medicare, Medicaid. The things they're trying to take away are things that affect people that are below them. When in actuality, those things that should remain to protect everyone. So if you take away from those that are beneath you, but you protect those that are above you, then how do you say that you are actually promoting the general welfare for everyone? So to answer your question, what is going on? I don't know what's going on, but I can clearly see what they're trying to do. And it's not working because I think the American people can see right through it. What concerns me most, however, I'll be honest with you, is how our current president ran a political campaign and said he was going to do these things, and then he won overwhelmingly. He said he was going to take away some of the freedoms that he is doing, that he thinks that he's doing right now. He admitted that he was going to do it. And he didn't win by one vote. He didn't win by 2 votes. It was overwhelming. And that's concerning. So what is going on here? I do not know, because when I look at it, it doesn't really make much sense.
I would like to add to that, as a former federal employee, and where many of my colleagues were let go. Matter of fact, almost my entire former division at the Centers for Disease Control is gone. And what's remaining is proposed to be gone with this big, beautiful bill. And what makes me sad is that they're eliminating things without even fully understanding the purpose and function of the roles that they've, terminated. And there's a whole slew of employees that are being rehired because they figured out they were actually necessary.
Yes.
So I think it's the waste and abuse is happening with all of these firings and then rehirings and then having to compensate for all of the services that they eliminated that they now have to reinstate, and having to fight all of the litigation for all of the things that they eliminated. They have to now reinstate, including all of the grants that that were canceled through the National Institutes of Health that now have to be reinstated. So it's this Doge, this department was formed to eliminate waste and abuse, but really it's serving as a source of waste and
Right.
abuse. And when you actually look at, financially, eliminating the federal workforce is not even putting a dent in, the national debt or, in the budget. And the things that, cost the most money, including all of the, contracts with Elon Musk and other people whose, shoulders they pat and who, they try to make sure their pockets are padded well, aren't the areas where they're looking for to save. It's just really the elimination of programs and services for those who need it the most.
Mhm.
Exactly. Can I jump in there and say this? Have
Yeah.
you heard anyone who talks about waste and abuse talk about tax loopholes? You don't even hear that term very often. Tax loopholes, if they would just eliminate some of the tax loopholes that exist for hedge fund managers, for private entities, government contracts, the subsidies that Boeing and Lockheed, some of the Fortune 100, Fortune 500 get, you wouldn't even have to get rid of many employees, or if any at all. But you
Mm-hmm.
never hear anyone talk about tax loopholes because tax loopholes protect those, like I said earlier, they're looking down, not up. They looked up, they would look at tax loopholes. They don't want to look up because they're protecting their own. So what's happening is you're not for the people, you're for the people above you, which is a small set. We call that, what is that, oligarchy? I think that's what it's called, where a small set of set of individuals actually control things. And that's what's happening. So you're seeing your Elon Musk, you're seeing your Donald Trumps and some others who are actually in full control, and they are really just cutting and abusing their power, cutting things from those they're supposed to protect, but really protecting those that are at their level and above.
Mm-hmm.
So Dedrick, because you deal with those who are, looked down on, or in terms of the member in the pew, um, the working class individuals, those who are being affected by these things. What are you seeing in terms of boots on the ground? The effects of all of these cuts. Some of them just seem arbitrary, and then oops, maybe we shouldn't have done that, and then having to backtrack, etc. What is it doing to the minds, the hearts, the spiritual lives of the individuals who are being touched?
Well, people are terrorized at the moment.
Mm,
We have had ICE agents show up at our churches.
Mm.
We've had people who are refusing to go to work or to school. We have seen in the New York City area graduations that are half empty because
mm,
students are afraid to go to their graduations. And the impact of these cuts are going to be absolutely detrimental in so many ways. When we talk about states' rights and what happens from one state to another state, we talk about healthcare, for example. As my wife and I, as we are maturing, I don't want to say that we're getting senior, we're just maturing gracefully. As we mature gracefully, we have to stop and think about, well, where will we anchor when we get old? And we have decided that we cannot anchor in a red state. We just cannot. The fragility of healthcare in those places is so tenuous. Healthcare is so tenuous. We just lost a cousin who's 53 years old. There's another cousin right now who's in hospital in Georgia. They're both in Georgia, and Georgia does not have a good social safety net. So therefore, if you're sick in Georgia, once your initial benefits run out, they send a woman home with two casts up to her hips. She can't stand, she can't feed herself, she can't wipe her bottom. They just send her home to live with her sister. Essentially, they send her home to die. This happens
mm,
over and over again, and I'm experiencing this. We have people who have not gone out of their house for several weeks because they're afraid to go out of their house. They're afraid to go to the grocery store, you know. And so the impact on the ground is horrendous. But not only, I want to go back to the whole idea of erasing history too, because you talk about states' rights and what happens from one state to another state,
mhm,
and how it has become illegal in certain states to even really teach Black history under the so-called uh, 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 umbrella of so-called critical race theory, which most have never read and scarcely understand. But they're
mhm,
taking history out of our schools and away from our children at a time when our children need to be grappling with these large issues and grappling with the founding of our nation and what it means. And so we have some very, very serious challenges on the ground. And as I look at the cuts to education, because I'm also an educator, my wife works in education. Education is in our bones. The impact upon what gets down to the local school levels the cuts that are taking place in schools that are already marginalized, the impact of these cuts upon HBCUs like Oakwood University and other historically black colleges and universities when they go in and start to gut out the Department of Education and start to gut out and threaten to gut out things like Pell Grants for poor children to be able to go to college. These things have tremendous impact upon our people, and I will say that um, unlike in times past, where because our communities were more insulated, we tended to think together and act together. Now we're more dispersed at a time when we need to be more unified. And so consequently, the voice to speak out about this has become much more muted and much more dispersed, therefore much less focused.
You know, that's an interesting point that you're making there, Dr. Blue, because I was looking at it from the perspective, I was actually seeing one of, I would say, I think the challenges or one of maybe sort of the factors of this world that we're living in of intolerance and whatever is that we are self-selecting and putting ourselves in these social silos. And so therefore, we're not getting to know individuals who are different than us in whatever different way. And so therefore, we no longer have any sort of empathy to them. We don't recognize them as even just, individuals and humans. So I appreciate your perspective as far, and I certainly understand that. But yeah, I was thinking when we were having this conversation that, this self-imposed, whether we're doing it on the internet, and I guess the internet is helping us do that, or social media, excuse me, with the algorithms is really helping us stay in these silos of just and you have to be very deliberate these days, and I think we should be. I think we're called to be, but in order to be able to hear other perspectives, and I think we should have a desire. Again, that's something I think that we've lost.
Yeah.
A desire to recognize others' perspectives, what it's like to be, an African American woman seeking healthcare. What it's like to be a low-income student in a inner city, trying to get a good education. Like all those are all things that I think that we should, if that's not our own experience, try to engage with those individuals so that we can have empathy.
Yeah, Melissa,
Excuse
I
me.
agree with you. I think that we are in silos, and what I was speaking in terms of is the focus of individuals toward galvanizing toward addressing these issues. Uh, in the African American community, for example, we have silos in the African American community. So it's not just this community or that community. We have people who live in suburbs versus those who are in the urban area. We have certain classes of people. We have immigrants versus non-immigrants, and there's so many things. During the 1960s, what I was referring to was like during the civil rights era, when our communities were forced into segregation. It gave us more energy and focus toward addressing the larger issue together. And
Yeah.
now we're not addressing those issues together. And primarily it's because of these silos. Yeah, I agree
Well,
with you.
and also, I think another contributing factor is what we talked to before about like sort of the instability and the chaos of the world that we're living also contributes to not being able to galvanize as an oppositional force, right? And I think again that's intentional on the those that are in charge.
No, absolutely. Because, I was thinking about Melissa in terms of when you look historically at issues that needed to be faced on a national level, etc., and then you would have groups who seem to be strange bedfellows coming together on common grounds to fight for that particular issue. Um, because if we remain in the silos, and even as a Seventh Day Adventist church, with you know, if we try to fight some of these issues ourselves, we don't want to involve anybody else. We don't want to join with anybody else. Um, we're just like I'm trying to think of the analogy, but a very minute amount of people our voice is tiny. But then if there's an issue in which we can join with other groups, other denominations, other individuals, etc., around some of these things that are affecting all of us, then the voice is heard a little bit more. Maybe you can kind of give some examples of that, or unpack that a little bit more.
Yeah, the one that jumps to mind, I think, most readily is when we were actually involved, the Seventh-day Adventist Church was actually involved in drafting and then advocating for passage of a piece of legislation that dealt with comprehensive protections for both LGBTQ individuals and while maintaining religious freedom protections for people of faith, right? And we were able to, again, work with LGBTQ rights advocates who we were able to come together, and these were not always easy conversations, but they were done with coming together, with treating each other with as equals, right? As image bearers, and saying, it. I believe that you have the right to public accommodation. I believe that you have the right to not be discriminated in your housing choices. I believe that you have the right to not be discriminated in the secular workplace, right? As a Christian, I should feel very comfortable saying that. And then to have LGBTQ individuals standing up for my right as a person of faith, and particularly as a Christian, which Christianity has not done. There's I would certainly understand if an LGBTQ individual was not interested. It was too triggering. It was too much emotional damage, right? To partner with us, but to be able to establish relationships with, again, these were a select few organizations that we were able to work with, but just to be able to develop that level of trust and empathy and compassion for each other. There, at no point in the conversations were we asked or expected to compromise the church's position on LGBTQ rights, or human sexuality or gender identity. At no part of it was. We were very clear up front. Here's where we are, but at the same time, we can stand up for you as a human being, right? And your dignity. And so I think, to me, that was really, really rewarding, to have that opportunity to do that.
It's good to hear that, because I've seen the church seem to be very silent on a lot of these issues that are considered, social issues. And I think it's important for us as Christians, to work to make sure that everyone, human beings, have rights, and to fight for for human rights. But I don't know if that sentiment extends to everyone within our church, and I'm very happy to hear that you all have been able to push for policies like that give rights to everyone.
So can I pull on that and ask Melissa a question? I hate to put you on the spot, but there are some issues that are not addressed by our church, it seems, or I don't hear about them.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Is that intentional, or am I just not hearing about it? Can you help me there?
Yeah, so I work for the North American division, and so I can speak to domestic policy issues. That's my portfolio, or that's our portfolio, and we really get our directives from our administration as far as our prioritization, as far as which issues that we engage in and which we don't. I think that there's two answers. One is, I think that the church prioritizes religious freedom issues, both as far as the religious freedom rights of the organization, and as far or faith-based institutions, and then religious freedom rights of individuals, right? Your right as an individual and your religious freedom rights. I think that is their priority as far as our office. And I think that and then I think there's then sort of just the reality of, we simply don't have the bandwidth with our infrastructure, with our staffing, with our budget, to really do anything out. Do you know what I mean? Like it's not possible, but that is not what is driving. I think if there was a desire to engage in other spaces, then that would be the situation. To From a personal level, I think that there's a lot of things are, or I would say I'm a church member too, right? And so as a church member, I often think, wow, this seems like a piece of legislation that we should really engage in, and we don't. But it's interesting because our office, I mean, one of the beautiful things about the Seventh-day Adventist Church is that we are the most racially, ethnically, and politically diverse faith traditions here in the United States, right? And so I'm going to get a call, or very often I will get a call from a church member who says, the church needs to be speaking on this issue. Let's just choose the environment, right? On the environment, yeah, and say exactly what the position the church should take on that issue. And then within the same day, we'll get a call from another church member who says, we need to speak on environment, and then take the exact opposite position. And both feel very strongly that this is the position that the church should take, right? And so it's certainly, I think that helps illustrate another reason why we don't wade into some of these issues. Like, to me, again, as an individual, I think, well, it's obvious what position the church should take, but it's just as obvious to another church member that the church should take another position, if that makes sense. And then finally, one other quick point, which is one thing I really love about the Seventh-day Adventist Church is that it really values the individual member. When I work in the religion and the rights of the individual member, and I think it encourages the engagement of the individual member. And what I mean by that is I work in some spaces with some faith traditions who are only concerned about the religious freedom rights of the organization, right? They're not interested. They're only concerned because the organization is then what tells the members what they believe on various issues, right? It's not a conversation. And so I very much appreciate, I guess, what I would describe as the Protestant perspective of, we have our own conscience, we have our own minds. And so I value, because again, often when the church does dip its toe into things, we'll take the vaccination issue, for example. It can't have a conversation about religious freedom without talking about vaccines, right? When the church and it didn't even had an existing policy and pointed to that, then immediately there was this huge uproar of, how dare you try to speak on my rights, this is affecting my rights. And so I think it's unfortunately very complicated, but hopefully that gave a little bit of clarity as to why the church does what it does.
Yeah, I was just going to chime in here too, Everett, because you asked a very important question. I think that part of our challenge is not just legal, it's theological. In the Adventist Church, we tend, not historically, but we have over the last 150 years, we've tended to take a look at things from an individual perspective. For example, sin is personal and salvation is personal. We don't look at sin as being systemic, as being endemic within society. And so we tend to focus on the individual sins and talk about individual salvation, not talk about what you were talking about earlier, Everett. We talk about corporate sins, or the real doctors talking about the sins in the healthcare, or whatever. Let's talk about the sins in legal. We don't tend to go there because we want personal salvation. And in doing so, we sometimes forget that these larger societal sins and corporate sins and systemic sins are actually killing people. And therefore, to him that knoweth to do good and doeth it not, it is sin. So there's this tension that exists within the Adventist Church between protecting the rights of the individual and then standing up for what we believe to be right. But I think sometimes we sort of err on one side to the detriment of the other.
Yeah, and then thanks for saying that. And there's some things that just to baffle, I think, a lot of church members, because they are pretty obvious that they're egregious, and the church is silent, and that frustrates a lot of my circle, my friends.
Like
There are
what?
times
Like
we want
what?
the
What?
church to speak
Like
to
what?
them.
I'm just curious. What are those sins that your friends are saying are egregious? I'd like to know what they are, because I think it would be fruitful for the larger
Yeah,
context here. Yeah.
I think we could even talk about what's going. Let's start now with ICE and what's going on of pulling people off the streets and just sending them back to not even their country, but to where El Segundo, so wherever they're sending them. Um,
El Salvador.
it's
Hmm.
just El Salvador. Sorry, I said Segundo. It's just disheartening, and you don't hear or see. I don't hear or see, and I'm not going to say I can't speak
Mhm.
for what the church is doing. I haven't seen anything. I haven't seen any statements. I go back to social justice. I go back to years ago when we were losing a lot of our African American males at the hands of some brutal
Of police.
blacks,
Yeah.
and there was silence, and it's disheartening to watch the news and a tear is in your eye. And I'm sure, I hope, a tear is in the eye of my church leaders who are supposed to be compassionate and sharing the same concern I have for the well-being of everyone. And I don't hear or see anything. Now, I'm taking a strong stance because, like I said, Melissa, there may be things that are said that I may have missed, but I would
Right.
like to know.
Well, what I would, first of all, I can assure you that your church administrators are compassionate and they are crying in the same way that you are. They are individuals who are good Christian people who hurt when they see people hurting. So, I mean, that's be assured that that's the situation, and don't
Mhm.
take what you're viewing as silence as acquiescence. I think that, and one thing I appreciate about, and again, I can only speak for the North American division, I appreciate about our administration is that they are constantly encouraging individual engagement on various issues. Whatever, and not pointing out what issues you should be engaged on, but that how you are being moved in your life, this is a way you need to be engaged. As far as the ICE situation and the way that the church engaged on that, the legal department put together of the North American division put together and distributed through the church structure guidelines for individuals for local churches that were that in anticipation of a potential raid, also for individuals who were stopped, and what to let them know what their legal rights were, right? And so really trying to get information out in that way. So I think whatever ways, I mean, that we can be helpful or the church can be helpful, I think that it does try. Certainly, we can all do better. And I think both as individuals and as organizations. I also think that, again, and this might be a generational perspective, but I think sometimes statements when I see an organization issue a statement on something, I'm like, what does that do for me? Do you know what I mean? Like, I want to see some action. I want to see something substantive. But on the other hand, I know other individuals really appreciate when they see an official statement come out from. So I think, I think we try to engage or look to our, well, specifically in this instance, our church and its administration, try to look to them with grace and recognize that they are, again, as I said, individuals who really have the heart for people, and this should not be a sign that they don't. So I'll just kind of leave it there.
I kind of want to add to this conversation from the perspective of the Public Affairs and Religious Liberty Department used to just be called Religious Liberty, but now there's this public affairs aspect to it. And Melissa, you can kind of, correct me or steer me if I'm, going way off. But the religious liberty side is clear in terms of my rights are being violated as far as I'm being forced to work on the Sabbath or just that type of thing. I can't practice my religion in freedom. That's clear. But the public affairs aspect of it is something that is a little bit more newer. And I think it's something that many of us don't realize the importance of that. Because if we are out there in the community, getting to know our the government officials or our state legislators or our county officials, etc., building relationships with them so that when legislation is being promoted or suggested or and being either voted on or discussed, etc., the ability for us to be able to speak and share with those officials, with those legislators, this is the real effect and maybe even the unintended consequence of a particular piece of legislation that you are seeming to support, etc. And this is the real effect on this group of people that maybe you had no idea about, or maybe you
Right.
don't really see it from their perspective. So
Yeah.
it may not necessarily be the marching in the streets. It may not necessarily be the grand statements coming from the organization, all of which, I don't think it's an either or, but it should be, both and. But the
Right.
power of being able to have a relationship with, the city council knows who I am. Dr. Dedrick Blue is a local pastor in a local church, a local congregation. The city council knows who I am. So when I say, hey, when you're trying to close this particular store, you want to open up a new store, but you're putting it on that side of town. This is the health implications of the most vulnerable here in this side kind of town. And so I think that may hopefully help to let you know that you may not hear it, but that doesn't mean nothing is being done or said.
Right. That's a good point. I appreciate you making that point. I was just going to say, as far as my personal experience, as far as working in the legislative space, we're most effective when we're not broadcasting what we're doing. That's how we're able to get stuff done, is because, particularly in a very divided Congress, members don't want to be seen with working with another party. It's all conversations that are happening again, very privately, office to office, and so if we have established the relationships that Paul is talking about, and then are invited into these conversations, right, when things are happening, then that is, in my experience in working in this space, that is how we've been able to be most effective, is being asked to be a seat, given a seat at the table, a voice at the table. There's also the reality of there's legislation that just simply isn't going to pass, right? There's not a space for it in this particular administration, regardless of which administration it is. And so, using political bandwidth on a particular piece of legislation that isn't going to go, that isn't helpful either.
Yeah, I think that there's a clear difference though between, advocating for specific legislation and championing an issue. Like overall, our church should be championing and should be supporting those who are the most disenfranchised, those, for the poor, for the needy, for those, for all of those things that, we know that those who are most vulnerable should have access to. And it may not be a specific policy or legislation that we're advocating for, but I think we can be more vocal about our support, for certain issues that are very clear. There's one side or the other, and it's not really a specific bill or legislation that we're advocating for. Like there's right and there's wrong. I mean, and we know as Christians, we need to support. There will always be poor among us, right? And we need to support programs and all of these other things for, to support the poor. When there is a clear sentiment in this country, it seems sort of like hatred and resentment against those who are needy or disenfranchised. And that includes, it's not just those who are citizens. It includes, those who come to this country from other parts of the world, for safety or for a new life. And we look at them as like, as foreign, and they're not worthy. They need to come in the right way. But yet we block and bar all of the right ways to come into this country. And then we do everything we can to throw everybody out who's not like us. This xenophobia that exists in this country, the racism that exists. And we often are afraid to say those words. We're afraid to say racism. We're afraid to say that these things still are here in this country and they're very alive in this country. And I think our church can play a larger role in speaking against, those issues and being vocal about
Yeah,
where we stand.
yeah.
But
I just want to say,
so,
yeah. Yeah,
go ahead,
let
Doc.
me, let me just say this right, I think you're absolutely right. There is what I call what Martin Luther King would have termed the violence of silence, right?
Yeah.
When we're silent. Sometimes, though, as Seventh-day Adventists, we sit back and we look at the church and we're waiting for the church to act and waiting for the church to make a statement and waiting for the church to do something. I'm one of those people. I ain't waiting on nobody.
Yeah.
I'm just, and what I'm saying is, I think that um, one of the hallmarks of Seventh Day Adventism, as was talked about a little bit earlier, was this right of conscience, right? The respect for our individual conscience. And so, although I'm a member of the church and I want to be in lockstep where the church is going on certain issues, my conscience sometimes impels me to move forward into spaces that others will not go, and to enter into some conversations that others won't have conversations about. And so I don't mind sticking my neck out there on the line if I believe it, and hopefully others will join me. But right now, I'll just say this. I'll shut up, pause. I'll turn it over to you. But right now, I just want to say this. We are at the most critical point in that, not only in the history of our nation, but the history of our world. And it
Mhm.
disturbs me to no end that not only perhaps the church could be saying more, but individual members are so passive and so ready to lie down and roll over in the midst of this overwhelming crisis while they're waiting for somebody in DC or Maryland to say it's okay to speak. No, it's been okay to speak. That's why
Yeah.
we believe in conscience. That's why we believe in liberty. It's okay for
Yeah.
us to stand up. Yeah.
Paul, can I say one other
Go
thing just really quickly, and then I'll let you have your show
ahead.
back.
No,
I was
it's
just going
fine.
to say the reason that I was speaking specifically about legislation because that's the space that I work in.
Yeah.
And so
Yes.
I can't really say as to why the church X, Y, or Z. So I was just trying to speak in that space. But I completely agree with you. And I'm going to go back to that space because that's the one I know. But an example of what Dedrick is saying is absolutely true. Is when I have meetings with members of Congress, I always make sure and have representatives from their district because they don't care about me that represents the world, the North American Division Church, right? They care about getting reelected, and that means their votes. And so, yes, I agree with you, with all of you, as far as the church has an important role to play, as far as being a voice. But I think we would be surprised. What you're saying is there's right and there's wrong, and I agree that in my mind there's right and there's wrong. But you're going to see church members, Seventh Day Adventist church members, who disagree with what you believe is right and what you believe is wrong, and that's just the way it is. But then I was gonna, so yeah, Paul, sorry
No,
for
no,
taking
no,
over,
no.
but
Go ahead.
Well,
Go ahead.
let
Go
me
ahead.
jump in here. I think I might have started this, so let me end it. You answered it, Melissa. I probably don't hear a lot of things that are going on, but I would like to hear things a little bit louder. I think most of my peers would as well, and a lot of what church members do as well. One of the defining moments in George W. Bush's presidency, there are two, is the one where he's in the aircraft and you watch him looking and flying over Katrina after the hurricane hit. And he got ridiculed for not getting on the ground. He was in an aircraft looking down. But he redeemed himself after 9/11. What happened after 9/11? And he grabbed that bullhorn and he said, whoever did this, we're coming after you. We're going to get you. America speaks loudly and we hear you. It was two defining moments in his presidency, one where he was afraid to get down on the ground, and the other one where he actually spoke up. And a lot of times, most people feel like our church is in an aircraft looking from above and saying, wow, look what's going on down there. They don't hear anyone grabbing a bullhorn, and they're concerned that the church may not care. I
yeah,
can't
they
say
don't
that it's not
see.
being said, but they don't see it.
They, yeah, they don't see ACS, right? That's there
Right.
after the hurricane, right? They don't see
That's correct.
ADRA working in Ukraine during that time, right? And yeah,
Right.
so I agree. Good point.
Yeah,
So,
but it's not just that. But there was some vocal response when, for example, when USAID was demolished and all of the funds that usually goes to ADRA, you know, went away. there was a statement from the church about that loss, but there were many other losses happening. Church members being fired, all these other things that are happening in the midst of this chaos, and there's silence on that.
So okay, so now I'm going to jump in here because I think
Okay.
this kind of goes to where I was trying to go. There are so many different layers to this, and it's all interconnected. And throughout the program, we've talked about these things, going back to this idea of silos, going back to this idea of being afraid, going back to this idea of finances, and taking care of the above, and at the expense of those below us. So it could be that more is not being done, or more may not be said, or the perceptions of that because of finances and the fear of losing whatever finances we have, at the expense of the other person. Yes, I have sympathy for you, whether you're an immigrant or whether you are, a different, persuasion, etc. But if I give this, whatever limited resources we have as a nation, as a country, whatever I give to you, it's less that's available to me. And so this idea of the silos and everybody taking care of themselves and everybody being fearful about what's going to happen to you, I think that contributes to the perceived silence, the fact that we don't speak up louder than we should, the fact that there are certain issues that you may hear about. Zakiba, you talked about, okay, funds being taken from, USAID or ADRA, but not necessarily money being taken from the Social Security of the 82-year-old, that type of thing. And I think it's deliberate. Ultimately, we know it's of Satan because Satan seeks to divide. And if he can divide, then we can't unite. We can't be a United States, Everett. We can't unite on issues where we come together, where we self-sacrifice in terms of if I take less so that you can, have something, I'm willing to do that. And I think in a number of ways, Dedrick, you talk about we may be waiting for the corporate body to move and to speak and to lead, etc. But it's going to take the individuals. It's going to take individuals coming together to, whether it's from a religious perspective to finish the work, or from a financial perspective to come together. I know we're kind of getting towards the end of the show, and we don't have time to talk about all of these, whether it's cryptocurrency that is just. And listen, I admit I don't understand. It just seems like a pyramid scheme, or all these other things as a way of just. You were talking about tax cuts, and again, I'm not a financial analyst, but it just seems as if tools are there for the rich to get richer at the expense of the poor. And if you can divide the poor, they can't come together to realize that they do have power, to realize that it is we the people, to realize that it's incumbent upon us. And so I think it's a lot. It's a lot.
Yeah, and the sad part about this, Paul, though, is that a lot of people are they don't want to pay taxes for services that help the poor, but yet the programs they want to cut that they think will only impact the poor will end up impacting all of us. For
Yes.
example, Medicaid. We look at the Medicaid program and the huge proposed cuts to Medicaid. We think, well, I'm not on Medicaid, so it doesn't impact me. But you don't realize that hospitals are funded by Medicaid. And there is, an epidemic of hospital closures, and continued cuts to Medicaid will, in fact, may impact that hospital in your community being closed and you not having a place to go to.
Mm-hmm.
Or, you think about Medicaid and people don't realize that Medicaid funds graduate medical education programs along with Medicare, and that when those are cut, there are less, graduates from medical school, your future doctors being trained, less providers, and more, healthcare deserts. And so I think part of the problem is that there is an epidemic of ignorance in our country, of a lack of understanding of how these, social safety net programs, while supportive of, those who are most vulnerable, also feed into the economy and impact those who may not be direct recipients of those programs.
Mm-hmm.
You think
Mm-hmm.
about, there's going to be some doctors' practices that won't make as much that if Medicaid gets cut. There are hospitals that'll be impacted. There'll be jobs that are lost, and families will be impacted even if they don't receive those services directly.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, can I pull that
And
thread for 1 minute?
yeah, please,
She,
please.
she talked about being uneducated. I want to just hit on the tariffs for a minute. I'm passionate about these tariffs.
Mm-hmm.
They
Yes.
have pushed the tariffs as being important because we're going to get countries to pay for the tariffs that are going to be imposed. Do you recognize? I want everybody to hear me clearly. You're actually paying those
We are
taxes
paying
on those
for it.
tariffs. When the prices go up on those goods and services, what ends up happening is you're paying that. That may not affect those of us on this call. We may be middle class, we may be even higher. I don't know what your level is. But if you are on a 40 or $50,000 a year income, and there is a tariff applied to your good, whether you buy a box or some deodorant, can you afford $100 a month increase? Maybe I can, maybe you can, maybe Dr. Blue can, but can the average person? So
Mm-hmm.
what happens is the government says, yes, these countries are going to pay it. There's not a country, whether it be China or it be a smaller country in the Caribbean, that is actually giving money to the United States. You know where that money's coming from? That's coming from us when we buy that good or that service.
Yeah.
But they don't
Yeah.
sell it that way. And because we don't take the time to understand what's really going on, we say, well, that sounds like a good idea because the government's going to make money. Not only that, let me end with this. Once you receive all those tariffs, once Walmart and all these other companies that have to pay that tariff tax to get that good and service, you know what the government's going to do with that money? They're actually going to lower taxes for those that are above them, those that are higher income earners. If their taxes are lowered, they're going to become richer. They are actually going to be able to be supported more. He doesn't say anything about giving back those social programs that Zakiba talked about. If we had more income from tariffs, wouldn't it be great to use that income to turn back on some of these social programs that you're shutting down now? There's no thought of that. They're just gone away. So what are you going to do with that money? You're just going to feed it right back into the system. And you're going to be benefiting those that are actually not in need of a tax cut or another tax loop.
Yeah.
But we're moving
Yeah.
rapidly toward an oligarchic totalitarian fascism in this country.
Oh, yeah.
And I just want to say this because we're almost out of time. As a 7-day Adventist, we should have known that this was going to come,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because we've been talking about this for the last 150 years. That this country really does look like a lamb and speak like a dragon. And this is being manifested right now. And I just wish that what I would want my church to do, apart from speaking to the issues, is just start preaching that truth. Because that truth is powerful. That is a powerful revelation that God has given to us.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember when George Bush won, the Democrats got shellacked, and the Democrats didn't know if they were going to come back. And then Barack Obama came, and he won the House and the Senate and won everything. And people said, "Oh, I guess this is a new America. We're in post-racial America now. It's a kumbaya moment." I said, "Well, listen. Obviously, you have not read Revelation 13." Read Revelation 13. When you read Revelation 13, it lets you know that this country will become totalitarian. It will become fascist. It will take away people's rights. And we have an obligation and a responsibility to enlighten people to that. When we talk about truth and enlightenment and ignorance, let's tell them that. When you give people that framework, then they're able to put these little pieces of the puzzle together in a mosaic that makes sense.
Okay. Well, so you've helped us start to land the plane I'm going to take that as your kind of closing statement, your closing charge to us. So I'm going to give each of you an opportunity to give your closing statement, your closing charge in terms of how do we navigate living in America moving forward in light of prophecy, in light of where we are financially, in light of where we are with health, in light of where we are as far as religious liberty. And so, Zakiba, your closing thought, your
Mhm.
charge to us. What should we do from here, knowing the times in which we're living?
Well, I'm going to say the dirty word. Well, what has become a dirty word in this country? Equity. We must recommit to equity. We in equity. All equity it means is meeting people where they are, meeting their needs. I think it's important for us to be committed to equity, to community, to truth, and that includes demanding accountability from our leaders, being engaged and informed, participating in your communities. Um, and being able to serve and be of service to the individuals. And while our country may value profit over people, we can be the ones that have empathy, that show love. When everywhere else it seems that all hearts are growing cold, we can be the light in the darkness and make sure that we are serving those who are within our realm, within our community, regardless of what is happening at the state or national level.
Okay, thank you, Everett. From last word from you, a charge from you. Where do we go from here?
Yeah, I would. I'm focused on education, man. I'm so disheartened when I hear people say they don't know certain things that are so should be so obvious to us at this point. And really, I'm focusing on some things like just saving money, just understanding what interest is all about, just knowing the tariffs that I just talked about, not just looking at two parties and choosing which party I like because this they seem to align better with what I know. I'm going to give Donald Trump some credit here for a moment. I give him a lot of credit for certain things, but I'm going to give him credit here. He said years ago when we found out that he was not paying taxes, he said, well, I'm not doing anything wrong. I'm just following the actual tax code that is in place. Now, some may argue that's not fair, but in actuality, what that says to me is that what he is doing is he is just using the system that's in place to his advantage. I think a lot of times what we tend to do is not look at what's out there for us. How can we take advantage if it's going to be this way, and if things are not going to be in a positive direction for everyone, then what do I need to do to educate myself so I can navigate in this space? How can I not be um, um, found guilty of financing everything I need to purchase and starting to buy in cash instead of financing? That's a problem with our people. So there are things that we can look inside of ourselves and say, I need to understand what's going on. What is this tax market all about? What are antitrust laws all about? What is savings and interest and 401ks and things that we actually don't get involved in that are right there in our face? I want us to be educated as a people, not only about things that are going on in the government, but what can we do at home? What can we do in our homes to make ourselves better in these times?
Okay, thank you. Melissa, you have the last word. Where goeth we from here?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I just want to express my appreciation both to you, Paul, and to my co-panelists. It's really been a good conversation, and I'm appreciative of that. But I want to touch on something that Dedrick said as far as, and we really need to be looking at things through a spiritual lens, right? Not through, a bias in the news media, not through a political ideology, but we have been given a guidebook, and it reflects the character of God. It reflects his desire for us, and it reflects in time events. And I think that's the lens that we need to look through. We've been talking about rights today and self-interest and silos. And wouldn't it be great if we were doing what the Bible says, the golden rule of we were actually standing up for our neighbors? We were more interested in the rights and the vulnerabilities of someone else besides us. We've been promised as Christians that God's going to take care of us, right? So let's make sure and prioritize the rights of others. And just to piggyback on what Zakiba said before, as far as well, I guess all of you all were saying this, but just that educating yourself about, rather than just sort of taking the, what's fed to you by whatever your preferred media outlet is, but really taking the time to educate yourself, developing those relationships with others who are not like you. Because just from the, we were talking about taxes and tax cuts and social services programs, those affect us all. As a middle class individual who doesn't have children in the public school system, I am so grateful, and I am that my county prioritizes good public school education. It benefits me as an individual. It helps my property tax. It helps the quality of, the lowers the crime. It helps the quality of the citizenship that I work with. It means I have a better grocery store, and I'm called to care for those individuals that do have children in those public schools. So I had a lot of last words there, and thanks
No, I
again for the time.
appreciated it. No, I want to thank you all. In many ways, I feel we're just scratching the surface, but I know that there's an opportunity for us to, in future shows, to kind of dig deep a little bit. I really appreciate the idea of education insofar as understanding the actual hands-on, real-life impact that some decisions and some things that we just hear in theory is having on everyday life and everyday individuals. And that's one of the goals of this show, is to really educate people so that you can see what's happening, so it can inspire you to actually get involved, to do something, but with this understanding of the integration of faith in what we're doing, knowing from an end time perspective, or knowing from a biblical worldview, from a Christian standpoint, our role and responsibility in advocating for those who cannot advocate for themselves. So I want to thank you for this discussion and for agreeing to come on the show. And I'll be right back with some closing remarks. I want to thank you again for joining us. And I want to invite you to come back again next month, July the 17th, where we're going to have another show that we're working on. I would encourage you to like, subscribe, to share this, share the link, let people know they can go back and rewatch. And even if you have any ideas that you would like to see in terms of upcoming episodes, or things that you may want us to dive a little bit more deeply in, that you share that with us. But thank you for taking the time to join with us. I hope that you have been informed. I hope that you've been inspired. I hope that it's ignited something in you. And I encourage you to integrate your faith principles as you go and advocate for the least of these. Thank you for joining, and we'll see you next time in the public square.